Well, I'm Lamar White, and as I said, as a disclaimer, I am a candidate for the Okaloosa County School Board. And what I wanted to do tonight was to bring in some information to you about the money trail of Common Core, okay? And so this slide, I think there are about 18 slides, and I'll kind of go quick. This is just some information about me that I told you. And as you know, I worked for you for 35 years as a teacher and a coach and a principal. And I think that's important for me to put that out there for you so that maybe I can try to bring a real-world experience with Common Core and how we were implementing it in Okaloosa County. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what I wanted to talk with you about tonight are two objectives: funding for Common Core in Okaloosa School District, and as a part of that, and I heard someone say it earlier, Okaloosa School District's Race to the Top grant. Now that's a term that you're really going to want to remember, because the Race to the Top grant that every school district in Florida was allowed to participate in is how the funding really began in Common Core. All right, Race to the Top, sometimes called the RTTT grant. Okay, now what someone asked earlier about Common Core and what it is. In the education world, we have standards. We have benchmarks or objectives, if you will, that we want children to achieve. And in Florida, over several years, we developed what were called the Sunshine State Standards. And our test, you might have heard of the FCAT before, was designed to test students on their attainment or their acquisition of the Sunshine State Standards. All right? But that's no more. That changed. And I do want to add one point about the Florida Sunshine State Standards. They were Florida's standards. The Florida Sunshine State Standards that we had were developed by Florida teachers. The state of Florida held great conferences, and teachers would come in and they would decide what were the things that kids should know in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, and all the various subjects. But the key point for me was that these standards were developed by Florida teachers, those folks that work directly with kids every day. All right? In any case, the Common Core standards are replacing the Florida Sunshine State Standards, and that's key. That we need to understand that the Florida Sunshine State Standards are phased out and they're being replaced with the Common Core State Standards. Now, there's huge discussion about standards and a huge discussion about how involved should be the federal government in education. All right? Some people think that the federal government should have a really, really big role. Other people think the federal government should have no role. Because, and I often ask folks this question, how many times does the word education appear in the United States Constitution? Exactly, none. And we know what the Constitution says: those rights that aren't delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. Exactly. So there's still a huge debate about that, and there's no question that the federal government has been involved in education. You can talk about the Secondary Education Act or all those different things, but it's a big issue as to how involved. Okay. All right, this is from Education Week in February. Opinion on Common Core does not break down neatly along party lines. And that's what I've found interesting as I've given this talk to different groups. Democrats don't universally support Common Core just because they're Democrats and because it came from President Obama's administration. And that's what this article is saying in Newsweek. And critics cite a variety of different reasons that it ought to be changed. All right, so the funding trail really begins with the financial crisis, the Great Recession in 2008. And in 2009, President Obama signed into law, and I heard someone say it earlier, ARRA, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. ARRA provided funding for education. It provided people don't know this number, $4.35 billion to the states for education. And part of that funding mechanism was what we talked about a while ago, Race to the Top. That's how that money was going to get moved to the states and ultimately to the local school districts. And the key point here, too, is that it's an optional program. States did not have to participate in the program. Some states did not. In fact, Texas. Rick Perry said he didn't even like the bureaucrats in Texas telling him what to do, and he sure didn't want the ones in Washington telling him what to do. But in any case, Florida did decide to participate, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The Race to the Top grant had 4 key components. First of all, if you applied for the grant, you had to agree to adopt Common Core standards and assessments. And I saw earlier the joke on the wall about PARC, and that was great. PARC was the test that we're supposed to give. And of course in Florida now, most recently, we've pulled away from PARC, but I want to tell you that PARC still might be the test that ends up being selected in Florida. We're not sure about that yet. But in any case, it required us to adopt the Common Core standards, and it also required us to adopt and use PARC. Florida was actually the fiscal agent for PARC for the entire nation until Speaker Weatherford and Senate President Don Gates rejected PARC recently. The other thing that it required was building data systems that measure student growth and success and inform teachers and principals about how they can improve instruction. The key term there is building data systems. A lot of this money was to be spent for data systems, collection systems, computers, servers, mainframes, all that stuff. Third, to recruit, develop, and retain effective teachers, merit pay. And fourth, turning around low-achieving schools. And much of that is what we group together today and call urban education. So that was the purpose of Race to the Top. If you applied for the Race to the Top grant, you received points on how much of these things that you did. Okay? All right, Gay. In any case, it's a quick and dirty of who's in favor of Common Core. I can give this PowerPoint to you if you like. You can see that there are lots of federal and state legislators. I heard the question about Mike Huckabee. That's a great question. Governor Huckabee was much in favor of Common Core. He's recanted some of that now. I think Governor Huckabee lives in Watercolor. He probably can speak to that better than I could about his position. But in any case, we have multinational corporations that are in favor of Common Core. You have Microsoft, you have Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Florida PTA is in favor of Common Core. A lot of folks don't know that the Florida PTA received $1 million grant to help implement Common Core. Also, the Florida Teachers Association is in favor of Common Core. The Hillsborough District School Board received a $100 million grant. $100 million for one school district to implement and to bring about the changes necessary to implement Common Core. That came from the Bill Gates Foundation. Also, Jeb Bush, the National Review Online, you're well familiar, I'm sure, with the National Review and former Bill Buckley. But in any case, the National Review said that Common Core could be Jeb Bush's Romney Care. We'll have to wait and see about that. But Jeb Bush is a proponent of Common Core. In any case, Chris Christie is also in favor of Common Core. He made the remark that the Common Core state standards are a building block in our state's educational system. Okay? But I wanted you to see how diffuse and diverse that support of Common Core is in the United States. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is Ignite Learning. This is Jeb Bush's brother's computer company. And Ignite Learning is a way that students can learn via computer. And Neil Bush sells this product to school districts. And that's one of the ways, of course, that the Common Core standards can be promulgated. All right, this is, we call these graphic organizers in educational jargon. This is what a teacher has broken out all the different ways that Common Core happened. And I won't wear you out with all the different things in there, but it's kind of neat how she did that. And talks about the National Governors Association and all the different groups, Achieve, U.S. Department of Education, and their involvement in how Common Core developed and evolved. Okay?
Right.
All right, so what were the steps that led to the funding of Common Core in Florida and Okaloosa schools? Next slide, Gabe. Okay, the Okaloosa School District, our school district here, prepared a grant application. We all understand that grants are things that we write ourselves. We write and say what we're going to do if you give us this money. And we wrote the grant for $2.6 million, and that grant was approved by our school board 5-0. And when they approved that grant, it was 200 pages long. I've got the data, the records that I'll be able to show you, that they received that grant on a Thursday, 200 pages plus budget. They voted for it on a Monday night. They voted for it under consent agenda. Anyone know what that means? No discussion. Just approved. And so I'm not surprised that the board member didn't know that they had federal money. That's how they did it. Now, I can tell you that if I'm elected, it won't happen that way again. But in any case, it stipulated the implementation of Common Core, lesson study. It's a paperwork train, if you will, that our teachers are being required to do. It stipulated early release of students from school. When our school board approved this grant, that was written into it. I don't know if you're familiar or not, but once a month, in fact, today, we sent students home early from school. That's a local decision. That's not state law. All right? They approved it here. Training and other kinds of components. Interesting to me as someone who's looking at this from the outside, by law, every charter school in Okaloosa County had to be offered the opportunity to participate in the grant. And that would be Liza Jackson Preparatory School, it would be the different Marine academies, all the different charter schools in Okaloosa County had to be offered the opportunity to participate. When they were offered the opportunity, universally, guess what they said? No. So we're doing it, but they're not. All right? But that was their choice. In any case, the school district received the $2.6 million, and we're implementing the grant as we speak at this very moment. $2.6 million for all those things that we talked about, early release, teacher training, lesson study, etc. Okay? All right, in any case, if you look at this from a statewide perspective, what really happened was the federal government said, okay, here's this pot of American recovery money, and state of Florida, you have access to $700 million. The state of Florida receives $700 million of this set aside. From that, automatically, the State Department of Education kept $350 million in Tallahassee. The other $350 million went out to the local school districts that they could write a race to the top grant for, and that's what we did. Okaloosa County did, and I suspect, Debbie, the same thing in Santa Rosa, and I'm sure you'll talk about that. But that's really how it got to where it is, from the money that was funneled from the federal government at this time. Okay. In any case, we had to have, this is the cover page of the grant. You can see it was signed by the superintendent, Alexis Tibbetts, at this time, also signed by the chairman of the school board and the president of the teachers union. Okay? All right. This is an example of the budget pages. There are about 10 pages of those line items. Over here, these are the years, year 1, year 2, year 3, as this grant continues and how we're going to spend the money. And I will tell you, this grant is online, and I can provide that link if you like, and you can see how the money is actually being spent and where it was spent and where it's going to be spent. Okay, go ahead. You can see here on a summary of timeline, early release, 1 day a month. Now, that was written into the grant. I'm going to try to keep this academic and not partisan. Lesson study was included, and that's a huge paperwork hurdle that our teachers are having to deal with. Okay? It also included end-of-course exams in Okaloosa County. A lot of folks don't know there are state laws that require end-of-course exams in certain subjects. For example, algebra. There is a state end-of-course exam in algebra. In Okaloosa County, we decided, local mandate, that we would give end-of-course exams in every subject, including middle school. That's not law. That's a local decision. And I would submit to you that that takes a lot of time, a lot of instructional time, a lot of costs associated with that, but that was also written into this grant. And you know, when you do these grants, and when your grant's approved, and you get that money, and then you spend that money, there's another process that follows behind that. I'm sure you know what it is. It is an audit. And when you get audited, you have to do what you said you were going to do. Okay? In any case, it provided for substitutes, lesson study, etc. Okay, Gay. This is just a little tape we had, and we're not going to show it tonight, of when they voted, the actual vote. All right, go ahead. And this is how we're using the money. And this year, 2013, 2014, we're going to spend about $1 million, $750,000 on the current Race to the Top grant for Common Core in Okaloosa County. Go ahead, Gay. This is how we're spending it. You can see the line items. And so that really ends my part of the presentation tonight. I hope you got something from that. I hope you see how the federal government created the funding, wrote the specifications on how to access the funding, sent that money down to the states. The states, in turn, gave it to the counties who wrote the grants, and when they did so, they had to agree, and I gave you those 4 items, to implement Common Core. They had to implement the data collection systems, those 4 key items. Okay? That's really all I have tonight, Brenda. Okay? All right. Yes, sir?
The rationale for that early release.
Is this the part where I get to go political? I'll answer the question fairly and honestly and academically. The purpose of early release was to provide teacher training, primarily because of a new teacher evaluation system. All right? So the answer was to give training to teachers. Now, I will tell you that I am not a proponent. I am an opponent of early release, and I'll tell you why. There are 2 primary reasons, and I've got a handout later if I get my 2 minutes. I'll tell you about, but for the first time, Okaloosa District schools have been graded as a B school district. First time, ever. We were always an A school district since 2004. And the reason why we're a B school district is that we are suffering academic decline in Okaloosa County. And I'll give you some examples. For the first time, our 3rd grade mathematics test scores really are in the trash. Our writing test scores in Okaloosa County this past year were below the state average. Y'all know how low that is? The state average, for the first time. I've worked for y'all for 35 years. I don't ever remember a time Okaloosa County was below the state average in anything. I mean, we're throwing in the urban districts into that factor. So that's why I say that we're suffering academic decline, and in my position, and the issue that I'm bringing forth to the voters, is because we have lost instructional time. We've lost it in multiple ways. The first way we lost it was we send the kids home early. I added up the hours from the time a child's in kindergarten until the time they graduate. It's a third of a year that we take. It doesn't make sense to me. I believe in teacher training. I made my living at it. I taught university courses. But I know there are different ways to do teacher training than to have the children pay for it with their education by sending them home early. That's my position on early release. Did I answer your question directly? Okay.
I'm sure you've looked at, as an educator, as I've looked at the big statistics of when we established the federal Department of Education.
Yes, sir.
And the declining scores since that day all across America.
Yes, sir.
So, but what can you do at a local level to
Good
make
question.
sure we're not a part of that?
Good question. Here's how I answer that question for you. And I've been asked that question in several different areas. And the first way it usually starts is what's your position, Lamar, on Common Core? And my position is this. I am opposed to federal intervention in local education systems. And I'll take it a step further. I'm not just opposed to Common Core from President Obama's administration. I didn't like George Bush's No Child Left Behind program either, because both, in my mind, are what you said. There are attempts to intervene in the local education system by the federal government, and I'm opposed to that. The truth is, as a school board member, there will be little that I can do on a personal level to impact the federal Department of Education. But I'll tell you this, if you elect me to the school board of Okaloosa County, even though I'll be sworn to support the Constitution, and you probably know they've changed that, now you have to even swear to support the government, I'll be opposed to Common Core, and I'll work to reverse it. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, what impact is Common Core, just math, for instance, is going to have on the young people who are entering in jobs that require to do math and not necessarily take 30 minutes to come up with something that may almost be right, but is kind of in the way they were thinking.
Yes, sir.
You know, like that they have to give precise measurements or time or settings for
Right.
different things.
Right.
And to me, it just, maybe I'm just slow, but it seems totally confusing. And I just don't know how they could compete with the rest of the world if
Right.
we have this confusing type math. I don't believe the rest of the world are using anything nearly as stupid as that.
No, sir, I don't believe so either. Here's what happens, and Gay, I suspect you're going to talk about this. The folks in the state of Florida that are supporting Common Core are going to say that they support it because of high standards. They will say that the standards of Common Core are high standards. Yeah, they'll say more rigorous, more difficult, however you want to say it. And they'll say that to imply that that's why we're supporting it, that's why it's so good, because these are high standards for kids. But what I say is that, okay, but so were the Florida Sunshine State standards. And we literally, you, the taxpayers, spent in one year just to give the FCAT in Florida, the budget was $400 million. So you spent that money to develop those tests, develop those standards. You brought local teachers together to write those standards. And instead, now, what you're saying, we're going to get our standards from somebody else, from somewhere else, as opposed to standards that our teachers and our parents, of course, were involved in. And I'm against that. Yes, sir.
And that was my question. How come there hasn't been backlash from the people who wrote the Florida standards, which were the educators, and we all know how powerful the teachers' unions are, yet there's no backlash? They threw their standards away that they believed in and they wrote, and there's no backlash. So then the people in the system, the educators, are the ones guilty of allowing this because they're taking the money grab.
Well, let me extend what you said a little bit beyond just the teachers. It's not just them. Now, folks, I have to tell you, there's huge money involved in this, and I think that's what you're saying. And I'm talking about, guess what? Now we got to have new textbooks, right?
Written in Texas.
Or wherever. Now we got to have new curriculum because we got new standards. Now we got to have new, and throw out. And I'll tell you this, I think I showed you, I think that the supporters of Common Core have been very astute and adroit at providing funding. I think I showed you that the Florida Education Association received $1 million from the Gates Foundation. So some of that support has been funded.